I can tell you that I quite confidently know enough about Japan to know that it's a great place to visit. It's a good place to live. But I'm really glad I wasn't born there.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Korekara podcast. This week we have a super well-known guest in the AJATT community, JapaneseGaryBen. He's been learning Japanese for just over 3 years, documenting his progress each year on his YouTube channel. This podcast sort of serves as his 3-year update as we talk about his Japanese progress, pitch accent, experience meeting Japanese people, programming ambitions, and his plans to move to Japan. If you like the podcast, we would really appreciate it if you could like and subscribe, as not only would it help the YouTube algorithm, it would also really just motivate us to put out more content. And lastly, if you want bonus clips or bonus episodes and you want to support the podcast, please consider subscribing to us on Patreon. And we also have a Patreon only text channel in our Discord, and you get access to all our episodes a week early. Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed the podcast.
Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to the Korekara podcast, where we go into different aspects of Japan with people who know what they're talking about. I'm Raza, and I'm joined by my co-host Eric, and this week we have a very special guest in JapaneseGaryBen.
Yeah, so JapaneseGaryBen is an AJATTer who has been studying Japanese full-time since the middle of around 2017 using the all Japanese all the time method. And he's been a known figure in the community, providing a lot of lengthy videos of his progress in studying Japanese every year. And today he's most active on his Twitter, tweeting daily about the importance of immersion in language learning and solidifying his place in the online community of Japanese language learners. And today we wanted to ask GaryBen where his Japanese is today at the 3-year mark, given that he has yet to also put up a lengthy video this year. But before we get into that, can you give a quick background of who you are and where you are at today?
Oh, I couldn't have expected a better introduction than I got. Hi, I'm JapaneseGaryBen, an immersion-based language learner in Japanese. I used AJATT to get to basic level fluency in Japanese in about 18 months, and now I continue to aim higher in that goal. I was never really a person that imagined myself learning Japanese or any other language in the first place, but I guess that's just how life goes.
Yeah, and I guess you've talked about how you started learning Japanese in your 13-month AJATT update video. But for those who don't know, can you give us a little bit of context of what got you into Japan and Japanese in the first place?
Like a lot of people, I feel like it's just a culture thing. You just end up liking Japan, don't you, from a young age. So I'm much the same. I watched anime for a long time, but I never really thought about seriously learning the language outside of it sounding cool. But then eventually, at some point, after going to university and not really having confidence of doing what I was doing in university, I just needed something to fill my time, so I challenged myself to start learning Japanese by ordering manga off of Amazon Prime after it finally allowed you to import manga directly from Japan. And that's what got me started on being interested in just challenging myself to be able to read that book.
Oh, what book was that specifically?
It was the manga adaptation of Gundam Wing.
Oh,
came out in 2015. It hadn't been translated by that point, but I discovered just when I finished the initial part of AJATT for 18 months that it had been it started being translated 2 months after I started AJATT. So thank goodness I didn't know that before the time.
Helped you out in your journey right there.
Yeah, it was good ignorance to not know that, because I might have just given up at that point and go, well, I could just read it in English, who cares? But I have now read it all in Japanese.
And what was that like, kind of when you kind of accomplished that initial goal of reading it, all of that?
I don't know if I properly checked in that one volume, because it was one of the first things that I read. So it's not that I could accomplish all of it just from what I learned at that time, but it wasn't too hard. I did get a lot out of it. But then if I went back to it now and properly checked, it'd probably be somewhat of a different experience, because I have done that with other books. I have reread the same thing a year later and gone, wow, this is way easier than before. It's a great feeling of just it's like fog disappears from your mind and it just comes through far easier. In today I can listen to something calming on YouTube while I read a light novel, and that just be a normal thing to do in the same way anyone gets a cup of tea and reads a book. So it's a very comforting feeling when you finally just do understand things.
So in the beginning, you just bought that book and started to read that immediately?
I actually used it. Yeah, I did kind of do that. I started to use it as a study guide for multiple things because I initially do the kana, right? And what I did was when I learned like hiragana first, I then ran through the book reading it, just picking all of those out, and then learned katakana and then ran through the book picking all those out, even if I couldn't understand them, just to know which one is which and solidify that difference in my mind. And then I started learning kanji, and then I just started learning vocabulary and went back to that. But I didn't properly go back and read the book again until after I started AJATT, which was a bit after my initial start with Japanese when I was actually doing pretty traditional learning methods. But I changed my tune quite heavily on that.
Were you taking classes at all, or was it just online?
I have never taken a class for Japanese. I have also never owned a textbook for Japanese. I was, however, like looking at videos on YouTube, and there was a time when I was like quite heavily going through Wanikani. But I got about like 6 months into that or something, and then I happened to come across a video in my YouTube recommendations of Brit versus Japan posting his 18 months progress of AJATT, and I went, this just makes sense. This fits. I ended up reading AJATT's table of contents from Matt versus Japan's recommendations, and then I just made a big commitment to get ready for doing that in my own life.
And where you thought you would be throughout your entire journey studying Japanese?
I guess.
Like, I know Kat says the 18-month is the fluency mark, but
I mean, I think that's a good way of describing it if you do go as hard as, like, Kat's or I did. Like, that makes sense. It's also, like, hard to say, like, are you where you thought you were is like, I feel like you get more humble about it as time passes. Like, when you get to the initial 18 months, you go like, well, I definitely understand most things. But if you were to say, am I, like, amazing conversationalist, you'd be like, nah. That sort of feeling. Whereas if I come to now, it's more like, I definitely do feel that, like, I just have Japanese thoughts far more normally, and it makes more sense. Due to doing like some part-time work more recently, like my amount of like conscious vocabulary that I use when I speak has gone down just from contact, but I feel like my understanding overall has increased over time compared to the 18-month mark. But it is very subtle in comparison because it's hard to be conscious of it because how good you are is always like very mundane to yourself. So if there's any point where you don't feel like you're making progress, it just feels like you're not at all special. It feels like you're not doing anything. But like with the first 18 months, since it's such like a weight off your mind to go from nothing to I understand basically anything you put in front of me, that feels like far more of a piece of accomplishment than it feels to go from there to where I am now. Especially in terms of explaining that difference to other people, because they can't feel the difference that I'm having. And they probably wouldn't be able to like properly judge my level of speaking. So even if my speaking improved, like there's very little difference, and I don't have great confidence in speaking just because since I haven't got a great grasp of pitch accent yet, I don't really trust myself to go deep into it without the knowledge that I must be making so many mistakes right now. I must look like an idiot to Japanese people right now, even if I don't look like an idiot to other people.
Did you have initial expectations of these milestones? Like at the 2-year mark, I should be this good, or at the 3-year mark?
Honestly, when I first did it, I only really imagined like the initial investment of about 18 months, and the rest of the time would be like perfecting it, or like it would just go up from there. And that's basically what it is. But I don't think I thought initially of that, other than the idea that I would have to keep committing for the rest of my life to keep the skill I currently have, which is definitely a heavy thought.
Yeah, I guess kind of now you're at the 3-year mark. Would you say that you're completely fluent in Japanese? Like, for example, Matt vs. Japan said at this point he was fluent by any definition of the word.
Yeah, it's a great phrase. Thanks for that heavy pressure there, Matt. The problem with that, like, I hate making this sort of argument because it always sounds like a big excuse, because I hate people saying the same thing. Like when people make videos like, what is fluency? I'm just like, okay, wait a minute. Aren't you just making an excuse for your level? But it's like, even if you're fluent, it doesn't mean you're native. That's the real problem that you need to get across when this happens, is like everyone's like known understanding of what fluency is will be something close to a native, even though most people think that you will never get close to a native. That is impossible. I disagree with that. But at the same time, it feels sort of like embarrassing or crushing to be like, yeah, I'm fluent, but I'm not amazing because I'm not a native. And that's the only real scale that matters to me. Because even if I beat myself up, there'll be tons of people in which like I could probably like be better than, and it sounds kind of really cocky to say that, so I don't even like doing that. But to myself, it feels like I've accomplished like relatively little because it's become the norm to me, and because I'm so aware of how big of a gap there is between me and the perfection I'm constantly staring at every day. So it's like I'm completely fluent, I guess. Like I think I have more of the result than what most people would expect themselves to want, is an accurate way of describing it. Fluent in any definition of the word is accurate. I think I'd feel more confident about that if I allowed myself to speak. Because if I was speaking from the 18-month mark and doing basically the same thing that Matt was doing at the same time, then I think I would definitely agree with that sentence. The reason why I wouldn't is because Matt talked a lot when he was fluent before he ever considered the pitch accent problem, and became kind of like embarrassed and conscious about that. So he doesn't have that initial like extra weight on to him talking. So him from the time that he was fluent could just do that all the time without any shame. So like I'm sort of holding myself back from that. But I guess I would have to agree with that statement that I'm fluent by any definition of the word, as long as you don't consider fluency to be perfect native-like.
So you would consider like the biggest hurdle to perfect like for you right now would be the hurdle of pitch accent?
Yeah, because I wouldn't really allow myself to like practice speaking until I felt like I at least understood enough, like when I listen to Japanese, that pick it up enough so that I could accurately correct myself. Because at the moment it's more like when I speak, if I record myself and listen, I go, that's wrong. I'm not sure why that's wrong, but that feels wrong. And the pitch accent understanding would be the proper description of where that's going wrong and how to fix that. I could technically get that sort of input from a Japanese person, I feel, but at the same time, it may be hard for myself to like properly understand that if I couldn't at least reliably hear it in the first place. Because at that point, it is still the same problem that most people have with speaking languages anyway, where they're kind of making deductions and making a guessing game and then being corrected and then using that isn't very reliable. You have to be able to basically be competent before getting the mark by someone else correcting you. Because if you can't understand the correction, then you can't make the correction in the first place.
So to kind of solve that issue with the pitch accent, how have you kind of approached it in terms of kind of gaining that competence?
Well, I originally imagined I would go back and watch Dogen's videos again, which I have to some extent, and they do slide in more competently now that it's not just a fresh thought of a new concept being given to me. So it's not that bad. But the biggest sort of effort I did was relatively recently, actually. It was probably maybe like half a year ago now. I downloaded Yoga Pants' pitch accent deck he made from a bunch of dictionaries that have audio files. And that has like he made two versions of it. One is the same person's version. The other one is the version that I downloaded. There's 65,000 cards in it, and so I've been working through those, like doing 500 revisions a day, and then like 100 new cards a day when I can do it. I don't like how like classroom that is in comparison, because it feels like learning vocabulary sort of thing, because it's just the word with the pitch accent, and if you can, you remember it, and it plays the audio. But I feel it's definitely been useful, even though I'm not expecting myself to care about that many words. I'm about a sixth of the way through it, so like already to 10,000 or something. That's more words that I have cards for in my sentence deck. So, but like seeing things in that bulk, I think is a really good idea. I cannot properly evaluate that because I'm not at the end of where I'd like to be with pitch accent, but I think it's definitely helped because you get to see more patterns. It's not that everything falls into a pattern, but you get to see the general idea of what falls into a pattern, what doesn't, and there are some like there's some things that don't fit into that, and exceptions, etc. But just being able to get that many things does allow you to hear it more, and I feel like when I hear the audio now, I'm more like, yeah, that makes sense. I feel if I was going really hard, I would just test myself in the audio itself first and try to guess it from that, and that would probably help more. But at the moment, I'm actually surprisingly I'm surprised of how far I've managed to get just from doing that, because lately I have felt like I'm noticing it more and more, but it does take a few situations where people have to be speaking really clearly. Like, then there's time when it's not just a voice actor doing it, and I actually managed to still hear it right. I feel really accomplished at this point. But also I think my initial expectation for the amount of dedication required to do pitch accent is that I was pretty much expecting that I'd basically have to put in the same amount of time I've already put in for listening consciously, but just with the extra context of pitch accent on top and try to pay attention to that. And I don't think I've been able to give that amount of time again. And I think that's really affected me.
I see. I mean, have you seen, can you notice the mistakes when you listen to, like, Matt's Jiko Shokai video or Kat's the blue shirt video?
You know what? I haven't tried. I should consider that and try to do that, because, like, the only real time that I feel I can really get it right is the times when I see someone consistently get it wrong. Because it's far subtler if it's in, like, a context of a person who's quite good at speaking, right? But with a foreigner, like, everything's going to be slightly more accentuated, slightly more, like, emphasized. So I probably could tell the differences in, like, the common words being wrong. The most common ones usually, like, people saying yaru because, like, it's flat and people just don't naturally hit it flat, especially in, like, past tense. So I think I would notice that, because that's one of the common ones, even in, like, the video that Matt made of multiple people getting it wrong, including himself. The most common error was that one. So I could probably do it to some extent. The bigger problem with pitch accent isn't that individual words have a certain accent. It's that what is the correct answer when you have to balance those accents in one statement. Which one takes priority is the bigger problem. And that's something that I feel isn't so much something you have to learn through rules. That's what I feel I will have to just get used to from convincing myself I'm correctly hearing it enough to make that judgment. So I suppose I could watch those videos. I'd probably go do that.
Yeah, because, like, I mean, in those videos, they haven't studied pitch accent, but yet they still sound, like, pretty much, like, really good.
Yeah, I think it's...
To, like, other
I think it's the problem is, like, they definitely will sound really good, and I will sound comparable to that in some stance, because the thing that's making them sound really good is they're saying full thoughts of things that come from Japanese understanding, and they're saying them in the pace of which a Japanese person would say to speak, so it becomes incomparable to someone that does not have that same level of experience. But to a Japanese person, there's going to be many parts of it where they pick it out and go like, well, I can tell that's a foreigner. It's just like how if we heard anyone speaking another language, we couldn't tell that they were speaking in an accent. Like, Japanese people probably can't tell the difference between an American accent and an English accent. It's that sort of problem. Those are the subtle bits that you're really picking up on. If you can see the whole picture of the conversation, then they're going to seem impressive, and they deserve to seem impressive in comparison. But it's just going to be the sort of problem that only someone who really cares that much or a native will notice the problems in their speech.
Yeah, I think one thing that you were saying about how words come together and it's tricky for foreigners is, like, sometimes, like, one word has a certain pitch accent, but when you add another word on top of it, the pitch accent changes. Like, for example, if you say Japan, it's like Nihon. But if you say Japanese people, it becomes like Nihonjin. So, like, the accent changes.
That's pretty good. I mean, that's a bit of a different... That's more of a... Unfortunately, while it is a suffix, that becomes a different sort of word, but those have their own sort of rules to them, so it isn't too bad. I was thinking more like on a sentence level where you put, like weeks ago, and when you end up putting my on the end. Because, like, if you put a time frame sort of thing, and there should be, like, an accent on that time frame, it all gets erased and overridden by my at the end. So a lot of, like, pain that Matt has described has been like, well, you don't know what the accent's going to be unless you know the full sentence. So you have to either be perfectly speaking Japanese and then just hit it without thinking, or if you actually have the curse of consciously thinking about it, you have to awkwardly calculate your actions before they happen, which is harder, but I think there is a part of it that will come naturally, because, like in English, you hit less emphasis if you're speaking faster. Like, I think you have to speak at a certain speed to make it work. So if you are the type of person that is speaking still in, like, kato-koto Japanese, like, when it's in separate pieces sort of thing, you necessarily can't get sentence-level accent right, because if you have to stop and restart, you reset the accent pattern. Because every time a Japanese person, like, takes another breath, or like has a pause, they reset it from 0 again, and they don't have to keep the previous pattern going. So yeah, it does get quite complicated, and it's not just like Nihon to Nihonjin. It's harder, and also Nihonjin is the like, I'm saying it really badly because I'm not trying to speak in a Japanese accent in English, but like it's an awkward exception too, because it's the only thing that ends in jin that has the accent on jin. All the other ones have it on the end of like the actual place before the jin, because like attaching it to the end causes it to attach low, which means there's an accent before it. And as far as I know, Nihonjin is the only one where the accent is on the jin part instead. I have no idea why. But if it's going to be an exception, I'm glad it's that one, because then it's easy to remember.
Would you ever consider like doing speaking practice without considering pitch accent? Because I know Dogen has talked about how after studying pitch accent, he's become less fluent because now he has to do all this like calculation in his head when he's like saying a sentence. So you're almost like sacrificing communication by like trying to sound better, which like kind of defeats the purpose.
That does defeat the purpose, but it's also like why I've given myself that curse of just not wanting to speak. Also, speaking is embarrassing in the first place because it's never like in real life you'll just speak and no one will care, right? But in this context, if I speak, it's like it's speaking in the context of knowing I'm going to be evaluated. Like like even someone who's like listening just for the sake of like, oh, I want to see JapaneseGaryBen speak. It's an incredibly embarrassing thing to do, and part of the reason why I haven't made a video doing it. Because if I had made a video doing it, then Matt would have interviewed me, because that's the condition. Just make a video of yourself speaking. And like it's sort of cheesy because like while he understands that no one is going to be perfect at speaking from the level in which like he was expecting like of people, like, or that your experience is worth enough for me to like interview you and use you as a good source of like you've accomplished this does work. But like if you have the consciousness of knowing that you're bad at speaking, that's just very embarrassing, because like it's embarrassing even for Matt. That's why Matt hadn't made many videos of him speaking, because he knows that even if he's confident in his ability, it's just hard. But I guess I would do that if I was able to commit to it more. And I just have to get over the fact that most people wouldn't know. I mean, most people don't even care about the concept of pitch acting in the first place, and I don't really agree with them. But like, yeah, I would just have to allow myself to just not care in that moment. And like, the worst part of it for me wouldn't be me making the video; it would be me watching myself afterwards and going, whether or not I understand what's wrong with that, I can still feel that I'm making errors or like putting too much emphasis in a word, doing that classical foreigner thing of making a sound too long because I want to put an emphasis instead of a change in pitch, etc. But I guess I could do that. I mean, if I have the guts sometime soon, I'll probably just do that, ignore all the responses and just be like, yeah, there's the video of me speaking nonsense. It's like I just love stop and thinking a lot of the time because I'm too embarrassed to just be fully off the cuff. But like, it would be something like that. If people want to see that, and I guess they do, I might do that.
Stay tuned, guys. GaryBen might come through for you here.
We can put a teaser on our Patreon.
Yeah, but it's like it's not going to be that much better than like how it was at the 18-month mark, except that I feel that I have more complicated thoughts now. So like, I feel this is mostly going to be the feeling of 3 years and that's it. But like, I think I should just get used to the reality that most people won't be able to see what's wrong with my speech. So yeah, I guess I'll just take that as a win.
But I guess now kind of moving on from pitch accent, one of the things you showed in your first 13-month update video was that you had a daily habit of writing, I think like 80 kanji every single day by hand. Do you still continue to write kanji every single day?
I don't, but I think like I would have ended up doing that for a long time had there hadn't been circumstances that kind of ruined that habit for me. Like, there's just stuff, that busy work that got in the way, like, last year, and I just never picked it up again. But I don't feel guilty about stopping, though. Because, while it's nice to be able to write those, I haven't really forgotten how to write them. Because, and that's not really a problem, because it doesn't interfere with my recognition of kanji. Because the main goal of RTK is to get you used to enough to kanji that you can do the word association game, and that reading is not like looking at symbols is not tiring as hell to you. So technically, as soon as you got to that point, then it's not really a problem, unless you just start forgetting. But like my kanji are on like 5-year gaps by this point, so it's like it builds up if I leave it alone, but like it does. I'm not really gaining anything from doing it, because even if I was writing out actual like Japanese by hand, which I wouldn't really do, I'd probably, even if I was still writing those, I'd probably still forget what kanji is associated with what word, because like it's not the same exercise as that writing down and studying. But yeah, I otherwise would have still been doing that till now. I did continue that for like over 2 years. I didn't really think of it anything by that point.
And I guess, were there other habits that you ended up dropping?
I don't think so. I think the biggest habit I dropped was like forcing myself to listen to Japanese as I slept. I started putting on more relaxing things, or like just turning the sound off. So no longer tape the earphones to my head, for one thing.
Did that ever affect your sleep schedule at all? Listening while sleeping?
The one thing that affected my sleep schedule is whether or not I had a clear idea of what I wanted to do the next day. It became very hard to be satisfied enough to go to bed one day unless I felt like there was something I was looking forward to the next day. Having a terrible sleep schedule is mostly a now sort of thing, because of, you know, the world is over and the several like problems and things I'm trying to commit to, but you know, just being alive is enough reward in the current state of things, so I shouldn't beat myself up for getting up late.
Yeah, and you got Japanese.
Yeah, I've got Japanese to comfort me all the time.
And I guess one thing that you also often talk about is how grammar study doesn't really get you that far, but you had initially put in time watching videos such as like from Japanese Ammo or Japanese from Zero. So would you say that was a waste of time, or did it actually help you in some way?
This is definitely one of those questions that when I read this on the document you gave me, I thought to myself, these people really did watch my videos, holy hell. Because there could have been a level of which, like, you just go like, oh yeah, just tell us about yourself. And they'd be like, if I'm just going to end up repeating things, aren't I? I don't have much to actually say about myself. But then the things in response to everything I've said in videos, just like, yeah, okay, that's actually just the thing. I'd say the number one thing I got out of those videos, rather than understanding, was confirmation that I'm interested in learning Japanese. When I first started learning those sort of things, the kind of thought that made me go, I want to go further in Japanese was things like, I love Japanese verb conjugations. That fact is still true, but it's a bit of an irrelevant fact at this point. But like, I think the only real thing that you get out of that is just testing whether or not you like the language enough to want to go further, rather than whether or not the grammar is really that important. Because to some extent, I wish I just went in with a blank slate. I feel somewhat guilty that I went in without a blank slate and some vocabulary. Not because it gives me like a one-up in comparison to people who are going in like with nothing. It's just more that I didn't want that sort of baggage and that sort of impression created from those videos affecting me in the first place. So, while I don't think like it's terrible those videos exist or anything, and those people definitely want to help people, as far as it's helpful for you, I think you just need to use them to be like, do I like the sound of this? Do I like the sound of that? Actually remembering those rules is a bit weird, and also like, I think if you're going to learn something and force yourself to learn some basics, it's going to be like, what this different like verbs look like this, adjectives look like this. Here's how you conjugate them, and that's basically it. And even then, if you get to just that, get to like the te form, like that's still 80 videos of Japanese from Zero, surprisingly. So it feels like a lot of information when it's in front of you, like overwhelming and hard to place, and you have to awkwardly remember it. But like, if you just interact with the language every day, then you just see that normally as a matter of fact without having to think about it. So it's virtually way easier.
I see. And I guess now, kind of given with Japanese, you're speaking a language from a different country. So have you actually interacted with people from that country, such as have you ever gotten to actually meet Japanese people and become friends with them?
I've not done this, but it's also probably just because I'm terrible at making friends. The times I had interactions with Japanese people, I think like hasn't increased since the time I made those videos. Like there's one example that I don't know if I talked about in a video where I went to an online, like it's like an anonymous sort of Skype thing. It's a bit like a Omegle, but for like Japanese people, but not nearly as popular enough. And you get to have a box of a small introduction and then just talk. And I didn't get much out of it because most people just disconnected. But like I just put like I'm a foreigner in the box, and like the conversation was usually quite simple and nothing more than like them just not believing I'm a foreigner and me going, no, I'm a foreigner though. They thought I was like, I wasn't saying anything complicated. I was doing like speaking in like 6-word sentences at most, right? And I was just like, you're a Japanese person, right? Like, no, I'm a foreigner. It's like, well, I don't hate that sort of bit, but, you know, you got to make it interesting for me. Like, no, I'm a foreigner. This isn't a joke. I'm just a foreigner. It's like, come on, like that's boring now. Come on, do something else. Like, no, I'm a foreigner. Do you know? That's what I'm saying. That was the conversation. That was most of the conversations. Because Japanese people don't expect people to just be speaking Japanese. If like they were talking to me like in Skype with a camera and having to listen to me talk, they'd be like, okay, but like some part of them would still be like, those comments on YouTube videos is like, you are very good Japanese. That sort of thing. Like they would probably start speaking in English because they felt they needed to communicate to me for some reason. But when they can't see that, they're just like, I don't believe you.
Yeah, at least you didn't get Jozu'd.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like that would have happened. I certainly wouldn't have gotten like Matt's VR video, like "Nande sonna ni omae no?" Like that sort of that thing. Like that's what you really want to aim for. That's like, why are you so good? Not you're very good at Japanese. Yeah.
I mean, interestingly, I remember Matt said that when he started speaking, I think around like 2 years or 3 years, people didn't even say he was Jozu. They just assumed he was like half Japanese or something.
Yeah, like it's there, but there's something wrong with it sort of impression, right? I think that's just because like it's so rare to Japanese people that they like, if someone can actually speak Japanese to a conversational extent that doesn't look like they're continually stopping and thinking or like is weirdly in pieces, then they have to assume that because it's just so rare to them.
Yeah.
I think that's what goes into it.
Have you been able to meet any Japanese people in real life?
No, there's still just the one time at the bus stop where I hesitated to. There's nothing really else done. I don't know how I would even like meet Japanese people. It seems a bit weird to just to try and do that in my like local community or something. I think it's more that like I just don't know what it takes to meet those people and make friends. Because even when I asked like Matt about it was just like the closest friends I have in like Japanese people, like people that I happen to meet like on Skype somehow. Like it's not like he went out and made Japanese friends so much as he met someone on the internet and somehow they stayed. So I guess that's a bit impressive.
I think Matt has like a lot of experiences like just seeing people who look Japanese and then going up to them and talking to them and actually like making a lot of friends that way.
Yeah, he probably has that level of confidence. I think I still have the problem of being like, this person is Japanese, right? I'm not just being racist when I see Asian people, because they're usually not Japanese. They're usually not Japanese where I live. If they're Japanese where I live, it's because they go to a Japanese boarding school that's surprisingly close to where I live. But like, there's no good context of approaching like Japanese school children being like, "Hey, want to be my friend?"
Yeah, you make a really good point. And I think even in Matt's case, there's a couple times he accidentally messed up, like it wasn't a Japanese person. It was like, oh, I'm gonna walk right out of here.
Yeah. So there's an awkward time before, like, even at the bus stop, I was just thinking, this is Japanese, right? I'm hearing them speak Japanese, right? I'm not just having a hallucination. Listening in, it's like, I'm a stalker right now. I'm listening to people's conversations. Yeah.
I guess like a safe place is like a restaurant, like a Japanese restaurant. You'd be pretty safe. Like
I guess, but like, it's probably not anything sort of like high level enough to be that here. There's a lot of Chinese restaurants because like that's a bit more of a casual thing. But the closest thing we have here is Wagamama, and like I don't even like Wagamama. Like, if you've been there, if you've read the website is hilarious. It has an entire section on their philosophy of running Wagamama, and it has a like entire description of the Japanese philosophy of Kaizen, and it's just like That's just the Japanese word for improvement. What are you talking about? And like the menu is like curry rice. It's like why couldn't you just say that in English?
It misses the nuance.
It's like why? It's just a bit too much. Also, I didn't like the ramen I had there. I hope the ramen like in Japan is way better as it should be, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So I guess though, knowing Japanese to this extent now, has it led to any new opportunities for you?
I think you might expect this answer because like other people have talked about it. But the number one thing it's given me as like directly related to Japanese is that people think I'm smart even if I haven't done anything. Like they'll hear that like in interviews or something, I'll be like, oh, I study Japanese in my free time. It doesn't matter how good I am. It doesn't matter how good. They don't care. They cannot understand that. Just the words, I am studying Japanese makes you sound like a smart person. And then, after I say, I'm studying programming, again, it's, this person must be smart. It doesn't matter whether or not I've gotten any results doing that. They don't care. They can't know. They have no way of measuring that. But as soon as you say those magic words, it's like, oh, this person must be smart. That is the number one thing I've got from other people in terms of opportunities from saying that is the sort of like the value of this person must be smart without any sort of check thing. The actual value that I feel I've got out of it, it's not so much related to the fact I've learned Japanese. It's that I've taught myself that I can commit to something of this level, which is something I really needed, which has given me way more confidence to tackle other things. I wouldn't be doing any other things that I want to do if I hadn't accomplished this. And there are sometimes I think like, whoa, if I'd done that thing first, I would have made way more money from the same amount of time than I did from learning Japanese, which is just basically for your own interest, which may have served me better in the long term. But I never would have been able to do that or have that sort of mindset if I didn't have Japanese. So there is some level of like, now Japanese does get in the way of doing other things because I have to commit enough to Japanese just to keep my current level, even when I'm not trying to push myself to improve. And mostly in the last few years, it's been a lot trying to keep the same level while trying to take on some other things in the same time in my life.
And I guess, like, did you have any moments of doubt of whether or not studying Japanese was worth your time, or moments of wanting to give up?
I would have had way more of those moments if I had made diaries from the get-go, I think, because I am the type of person that announcing my plans to people inversely makes me less likely to do it because it somehow knocks the wind and tension out of my sails, and I just wouldn't have appreciated being watched that much. So I get the level of transparency seems like weird when you start at 13 months, but like I want to start at a point where I was like, by that point I was like, I'm doing this. There's no way I'm not continuing to do this. And I'm really glad making this sort of videos didn't go to my head in the sense of it thought like, I don't need to accomplish anything else. I've already done this much. Never mind, sort of thing. Because I feel like that would have got in the way if I had. The only real big reason why I'd think to give up Japanese now is that I have to balance it with anything else I'm doing now. If I want to keep the skill, I have to keep using it. It is a lifelong commitment. So the only reason to quit would be to say that I just want to commit to something else more, and I can't commit to something at the same amount that I did to Japanese, which would also be really good as a general pattern to do, and to some extent I want to keep doing that for the rest of my life. But I'm also terrible at multitasking. So the more I have more tasks to do, the less I'll accomplish of anything. So that would be the biggest reason why I would say, I'd worry about giving up.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it is like... I think everyone has moments of giving up, but I think the only real answer for why you should ever give up is honestly because you just don't like it. If there's many discussions of like, is learning a language worth your time? Like even Matt had that on his podcast, and I think he would have I don't know if I actually listened to it, but I think he would have said the same thing that I was thinking. That's like, no. If you were to ask anybody that's got to like language at a high level, I think like maybe if you ask like Kaufman, he'd be like, oh, it's a great thing, you get to meet so many people, I've done it's changed my life, I get to connect with so many people. But I don't have that sort of romanticism about connecting with people with the language. I have far more of an interest in like perfecting it as a skill rather than like the community aspect. So it's far more like the real reason to quit a language is because you're not interested in it. There is no innate value to a language at all. The language entirely comes from, do you care about it?
I see. And now, I guess, on your Japanese roadmap, so you talked a lot about pitch accent, but do you have anything else in mind that you want to maybe understand more of?
I think it would be like Japanese history or food. Like, it's not even like a skill level thing, it's just a level of knowledge. Because, one, I feel like I cannot talk about food in Japanese. I don't have enough context to. Partly because I haven't been to Japan, like, and didn't get the day-to-day experience of that is that. I know nothing about Japanese food outside of the most famous things that get mentioned, everything, all the time. I don't know how to talk about preparing Japanese food at all. Like, that sort of thing. And also, Japanese history comes up in a lot of courses, even though it's not really relevant to the skill of learning Japanese. But I always feel like when I talk to people that take those courses and they go like, oh, this historical figure or this guy that's on like Japanese money, and I'm just like, I don't know who that is. Or people talk about like famous novels, they'll be like, I've never heard of that. And so it's the level at which I feel I'm missing out on the culture because I'm very viciously only doing what I want in the language at any point. Like when I read a light novel, it's like a Gundam light novel. You know, I'm reading about giant robots. I'm not reading about, you know, like Sakamoto, like that sort of thing. So like I feel like I would want to fill those gaps in my knowledge, but at the same time, if I don't actually care enough or don't find an interesting enough book on it or something, I probably won't.
And one thing that you're really known for is like your rants on Twitter where you talk about immersion and the importance of immersion. But have you had any stories of arguments with other foreigners studying Japanese, or even like flexing on other foreigners studying Japanese?
My level of argument, believe it or not, has gone down over time. The times I had the most like collision with other learners was when I was still starting AJATT. The kind of story that I talk about where someone I knew was just like, I don't understand how RTK works, you're just going to forget it all, sort of thing. And it's just like, or they responded to a screenshot of me playing Overwatch in Japanese when I still knew nothing, right? And just be like, how, like, do you even understand half those words? Like, well, no, but that's why I'm doing it. You know, those are sort of most collisions I've had. Other than that, it's more like the times when, you know, something I post on Twitter will resonate enough that more people see it, other than the people that, you know, on my choir that I'm preaching to every day, sort of thing, that already agree with me, right? And it goes to someone else and they'll go like, that's not how it works. And then these people seem utterly surprised and like disarmed when I respond without giving up and just say basically the same thing again, but with more detail. And then they're just like, oh, like that's either my conversations that come from that either come from like, they'll disagree and we'll just go back and forth saying, yes, it is, no, it isn't, for like a few responses until that person says, hey, I don't want to argue, okay? Even though they're the one who's contending the point that I was making. Or it'll be, and this is like an odd ideal to the point where I feel like someone is making bots to do this for me or something, where they'll give one reply and I'll say why that's wrong, and then they'll go, I think I'm going to look up AJATT now.
The bots coming through advertising it all.
Yeah, the flexing isn't really happening, and flexing itself is kind of, it's kind of embarrassing. Like, the most I would do is just when I get unreasonably angry looking at forum posts. But I don't look at forum posts anymore, and I don't reply to anything. Like, the main time that I go to look at communities that talk about language learning is so I can remind myself of what other people think, so that I can, like, convince myself that what I have to say is actually worth saying. Like, I have inspiration enough to say something. Because, from my point of view, it's like, wait a minute, am I just not very impressive, actually? Like, is that, like, everyone else can do what I've done, right? It's not that hard, right? Am I just, like, saying a bunch of obvious things? Does it really matter? And then I go and look at what other people think. It's like, oh, right, yeah, they think like this. I forgot. And then I get the inspiration to say the thing again. Because it's usually, like, something that I thought myself in the past that I no longer think now, because I can't. But I often need that sort of antithesis to appear in front of me to give me enough inspiration to say something. So in some ways I have to make myself upset to be able to actually have something worth saying, because then I know it will resonate with people who need to hear it.
I see. Earlier you talked about how you're not that confident speaking just yet because of the pitch accent barrier. But
Yeah.
have you tried outputting through writing or texting?
Oh, I quite often write in Japanese. The main reason for doing that is because I quite often have thoughts in Japanese. So I continue the thought in writing and I try and record it. The only problem that ever really occurs in this is like, your thoughts are quite vague when you think, if you are thinking in a specific language at all. Because you can think in just, as Matt would call it, mentalese, but like if you think in a certain way, you'll think in the inner monologue, etc., which has to be words. So I'll do that in Japanese. And so I'll write it out, and occasionally I'll just forget the word that I need for a specific space, because I'll feel it in my head, but I've forgotten what it is. And that's the only problem that occurs. So I'll just force myself to keep the flow of the thought and leave that space blank and then come back to it and put it in. That's the only real problem that occurs when writing. Otherwise, I do write Japanese quite a lot because it's a good way to get out my thoughts. But it's just a long rant. It's far easier for me to talk in Japanese when I'm having an emotional reaction, because then it's not thought, then it's just, God damn it, in Japanese. So it's just like, inversely, one could say that when I'm speaking Japanese, my best is when I'm having a very bad personality moment.
Would you consider tweeting Japanese or making a
I do
vlog?
sometimes tweet in Japanese, actually, like when I feel like it's worth it. But then I feel like, what am I doing? Because my audience isn't people that speak Japanese, even if they want to learn Japanese. So it feels like I'm just making in-jokes if I start doing that. I also am surprised about the fact that I do get a decent number of replies, like positive ones mostly now, from actual Japanese people on my account. Like some of them a bit tongue-in-cheek where they're taking the piss, but and they're not doing it in English. Like they do actually reply to me in Japanese, despite the fact I haven't tweeted in Japanese very much. So there is a level in which they do at least trust me enough to read their sentences and argue with them. So there has been a time when a guy was like, I think it's too much to say that something is grammar is harmful, and I wrote back in Japanese like I'm going to say this in Japanese. You're going to hear me say it terribly. Yugai to yori muda desu ne. It's just more than harmful, pointless. Sort of a short smug response, and just kept going. And then he wanted to convince me of the beauty of Japanese grammar. I was like, that's not the argument that I'm having, sir. It's not whether or not it's beautiful to study grammar. You can do that if you want, but it's more like whether or not it's useful to do that. But I do have an account that's not JapaneseGaryBen, it's just myself, my real name, where I try to build a sort of brand there of myself and try to do things where I was specifically being bilingual, but I just couldn't get over watching myself make typos. I tried to make myself do both an English tweet and a Japanese tweet in the same tweet. And you just sort of can't, because making the same thought in both languages, you can't get one from the other. Your thought will start in one, and you'll put that out. And when you want to make the translation, you can't accurately translate it, because you need to make the thought from the ground up in the other language again. So more naturally, you just have to have the English thoughts and Japanese thoughts. But I just fell out of habit of doing it because it was supposed to chronicle and advertise look, I'm doing things in programming, but I haven't made too much progress on that. And there was too many times where 20 minutes later I just saw the typo in Japanese that I made in a post and went, why did I do that? That sort of thing.
But I guess now, when do you think you'll actually start outputting full force?
Oh, I don't know. There's some part of me that expects the real outputting full force to be a surprising thing in the future, where after I do better at the other things I want to be doing, like programming, so I have a decent income and everything's great again. You say I do full time since now, but since the 18 months since I had to get a part-time job, there is multiple levels in which that just isn't as dense as my original 18 months. And so what I'd really like to do is give myself enough freedom, economically, etc., to just do that again, but for the pitch accent level, and that might get further and further suspended as time goes on, which is also one of the reasons why I haven't really made a new video, because there isn't much worth saying other than I'm going to get to it, guys, and no one likes an update that's just, so things have happened in my life and this is why I'm gone, sort of thing, because that's not useful for anyone else. That's just giving people reason to stop paying attention to me. So that's also why I pushed a lot of my focus from making videos to doing Twitter, because it's something far easier to do, far more accessible, that I can keep up reasonably. Whereas making videos is like, I started trying to edit them because I admittedly thought that it's just a bit too much. Like, not just that making a long video, it's just a bit unprofessional. And when I got editing them, like, the time it takes to edit them meant that I watched them too closely and went, is this really worth saying, sort of thing. I just start doubting myself if I examine it too much. And also, I didn't deliver this moment quite good, like, as good as I could have. So, like, that doesn't seem good. And so it's just like, it only really works if the passion is off the cuff enough to be direct, but at the same time it feels like such disrespect to my audience to put out such shoddily made videos.
I see. And you mentioned how you have a part-time job now, so like what is it that you actually do? Is it related to Japan at all?
No, not at all. I worked at a corner store part-time. Not at all interesting, is it? It's quite unimpressive in comparison. But I don't have the job anymore because I had to stop it for the world ending. I like quit my job about 2 days before we all got the text saying stay home. And, you know, I just have family members that would be too easily affected by this sort of situation. So I don't have enough money to live by myself. So I'm just forced to not have to work right now.
I see.
Yeah, I guess going to your background in terms of, I guess, education then, for those of you who don't know, so GaryBen, you went to a university and studied gaming, and then pursued a master's degree before then dropping out. So
yes.
What did you study for the master's, and I guess what led to that decision of dropping out?
Well, the studying the master's is just an natural extension of the degree in developing games. The reason why I wanted to do it is, well, for one thing, it's an easy way to stand out more than just having a degree. It doesn't really require much work, and I knew the people that were doing the master's degree course, so it wasn't actually that too hard. My main motivation for doing it in the first place is I wasn't proud of my level of performance in my degree itself, and somewhat, if I had a master's degree, I get to overwrite that immediately because no one will care about my degree once I have a master's, etc. But I ended up just not finding the motivation and getting used to the fact that I didn't fit in with that environment of how to learn. I'd actually be far better if I just studied by myself and didn't have the framing of being at university. But I didn't discover that until far later. So I just felt that a lot of things were wrong, and I didn't feel motivated about being in that sector anymore. And like, especially my image of myself being in that sector was something that I felt I was constantly betraying. So I just ended up losing confidence for that and dropped out, when technically passing wouldn't have been too hard, but I just couldn't bother to do it anymore. But as far as regrets go, I think that was a really good, important to regret and to have in my life, as something to learn from, because I feel like it's made me who I am. So inversely, it's made my sort of mindset for life more like, it doesn't matter if you screw up, because regrets are still something you learn from, which is quite different from the problem I had before, which was more like, my mindset is, I want to avoid mistakes at all costs, but there's no good that really comes from that.
Mm. And is like developing games still something you want to do?
I feel like if I got enough confidence and accomplished enough other things in my life to have like a stable income and other like to get further, I feel like I might come back around to it when it feels like not as much baggage to me anymore. But I don't think I'd do it like as a primary thing, like not my identity anymore or something like that. Because in the first place, making games is something you have to like doing. If you don't like doing, it's not worth it. In many ways, like money-wise, it's not worth it. It's just not worth it in how little like time you get to do anything else. Like crunch time and staying at the office overnight eating pizza because it's the only thing you can afford to enough time to get is a very real thing. So only if I had enough money to like make something by myself and like in a comfortable way would I probably ever do it. I wouldn't say that I have the skill to do it now, because I just don't value very much the skill that I managed to get from my time in university.
I see. Are you still open to doing translation work like you talked about in your 13-month video?
I would be if it was something like casual, like someone needed me to translate one thing into English, like if, say, a Japanese person needed their website translated into English, even just to look fancy, you know. I thought that's something I could add on as bonus value to programming, because I can sell my services not just to English-speaking people, but to Japanese people too. But actually, like, as for translation, I wouldn't do any like big ongoing projects if I was going to do it, because I wouldn't really want to have to work with multiple people to do it. And I understand what the problem's going to be for an ongoing project. I know many people who have just done have a lot of experience even just fan subbing shows and the problems that occur from those. So I have an idea of what goes into it. I wouldn't say I'm looking for translation things now, but if I could make it a thing to do on the side that people more approach me because they need something done rather than, say, working on a property sort of thing, then I'd most likely be doing that rather than something else.
Mm-hmm. And with programming, is there overlap between what you study in university and the sort of programming that you're doing now?
The correct answer is there should be, but there really isn't, because my university course was very experimental at the time. There wasn't much hard programming, and by the time we got to the hard programming, quote unquote, there wasn't really enough time to get depth in it. So it wasn't really anything more than what I knew from my experience of doing programming in school before I went to university, because I did take programming subject at that time. But it's not difficult in how it's different, because all the core concepts are basically the same. So it is the same, but what I'm using to do it is different, and the goal I'm using to do it is different. I really think that if you are just a person who can deal with programming at all, then it's not going to be much difference. So the answer is it should have been a help, but it wasn't really. Basically learning things from zero, but there's not the pain of I don't understand programming. Programming's such a weird, scary monster. It's more so this is how you do that, and this is how you do that. It's just more I understand it's far more a problem of, with anything, and how I started to feel from learning Japanese. It's just a matter of time. It's just your willingness to put in the time. And even though programming is mostly just your ability to use Google correctly at every single point to learn something new. So it's not that bad. It's basically the same thing. It should be the same thing. It's not quite the same thing. In university I did a lot of a type of program that I wouldn't want to do so much now, that I thought I would like to do at the time, which was scripting, because scripting is quite awkward, and it's working with a framework someone else made rather than just giving yourself full power to do whatever you want, which is a bit more awkward.
One of the goals you talked about with programming is being able to be sort of a digital nomad of sorts, where you could essentially live anywhere, set your own hours, and pursue the things you wanted. So how close would you say you are to this goal?
I don't think that there's a good answer to this, because it's a weird mixture of extreme confidence and extreme laziness. It's this feeling of, I could probably do that in 2 years if I got off my arse. I have a weird confidence that this is definitely going to work, and that's also why I haven't committed to it on the fear of death sort of thing, which I really need to. The biggest bumper I've given myself is I need to do this before I'm 30, guys. I'm 26 now. If I let myself get to 30 and I still haven't accomplished this, I'm going to be really angry. But with the current state of how things are, I'm living for free basically at the moment, which is quite unfair. But also that kind of situation causes a lot of doubts and stuff. And programming's the real problem with it is you have to constantly give yourself a project. You have to be conscious all the time. Languages, in comparison, is somewhat easy once you get over the bump, because all you have to do is put stuff in front of you and then just look at it. You don't have to add any extra thought to it. You don't have to go, well, I need to do this next, and I need to do this next. You just go you just become a couch potato. So it's far easier, once you're more comfortable with it. So the real answer to the question is just it should be. It might have even possibly been in the past if I worked hard enough. But if it's in anything longer than 2 years from this moment, I'm going to be upset with myself, even if that's not me turning 30. Mm-hmm. So I think it's totally possible. I just haven't put in the correct amount of work.
I see. And I guess on the lines of professions, have you thought about JET, or is that something that's still on your horizon?
I feel like this is like this sort of questions were all very good because they all very much point out how you definitely pay attention to everything I say in my videos. But it feels like I'm firstly like forcing me to betray my audience here. I decided to not do JET, not because I'm against going to Japan, but as is pointed out by many people, the kind of people that do JET are often doing it for like an escape, like a weird reset, even though that's not what the job of JET is. It's not they disrespect the job of being there and being a teacher, but it's like they want to do it because like I want to get to Japan and stay there, sort of thing. And
Yeah.
I'm definitely sort of the same. But like I thought to myself, I wouldn't trust myself to be able to commit to studying other things whilst putting in the effort to be a teacher there, other than just the contact with Japanese. So I wouldn't really trust myself to do anything. So I thought I'd just end up at the end of it and go home and be like, crap, I forgot to get into something else afterwards. I forgot to create my tie that would keep me there, sort of thing. So I decided that I would have far more of the feeling of I would earn my way there by going there on my own power when I could. And that's far more dependent on my own effort, which makes it less immediate and a bit weird and constantly pushes it into this perfectionist horizon of, is it okay to go there yet? But, I don't have the proper standard income to make that sort of move yet. But that's how I want to do it. Also, I would have applied at the end of last year, and I would have even got some advice from someone who I knew that had previously done it themselves, like 30 years ago or something. But I decided not to for those reasons. And then, since the world is the state in which it is now, I wouldn't even have been able to go if I had applied then. So I just considered it fate that happened.
I see. And have you gotten the opportunity to travel to Japan for vacation prior to this, or not yet?
No. I think that's going to catch a lot of people out. They're going to be really weirded out by the fact that, hello, my name is JapaneseGaryBen. I have become fluent in the language of a country I've never been to. This, and it's like, well, how do you know then? But I that's a reasonable assumption. But I'd be like, I know that I know. I don't really need that tested so much because that's a very normal thought. But it's only because you don't understand what it means to learn a language from immersion in your own environment rather than just being in the country, sort of thing. But no, I've never been there, and it's also that I've never been to most countries. I've very rarely go on vacation because I also have no hobby for doing such a thing. There's a lot of people that want to go to interesting places and stuff, but I just have no interest in that. If I was going to other countries, I wouldn't really want to do it if I was in the situation where I could do that pretty much freely. That would be an expression of my freedom more than I want to go to that country specifically. In the case of Japan, I do want to go there, but I don't feel like going there on holiday and coming back. And also going on holiday in my current situation isn't a monetary problem so much as it's I feel like the very act of going on holiday as a break from work is sort of just giving into the rat race. When I had stress at work, people would say oh, I want to go on holiday, because tons of my coworkers did. Even if you work part-time in a corner shop, you still make enough money to go on holiday. And it's just yeah, but if I did that, I would then have to keep working here longer to make the money to make up the fact that I went on the holiday. So the stress relief you gain from going on holiday gets combated by the fact that you are no longer making enough money to escape from the job in the first place. So I'm just not generally a person to go on holiday either, but I probably would if I could do it without any big thought behind it.
What about a working holiday?
I guess so, but I'd also need to get a solid grab in the work, because I think if I did a working holiday like that, what would happen is, I couldn't just extend the holiday, but I'd go back and then I'd be like, why wasn't I just living there, sort of thing, right? Because if I can take a working holiday there, why don't I just live there, sort of, yeah.
Because I think you can also just work in a corner store in Japan with the working holiday visa.
Oh god, if I did that, that'd be weird. I wouldn't appreciate working in the corner shop in Japan. It sounds way too much pressure. I've heard so many stories of it's oh yeah, there's foreigners that work in the corner shop down the street, and they're just they forgot the respective language because they were just being people, and you shouldn't do that. And people get really down on them. But What a weird flex that would be, right? If you like came back from your working holiday and people asked where you've been, it's like, I worked in a corner shop in another country.
At the convenience.
Oh. Going places.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually ran into a foreigner working at one of those stores when I was in Japan before. It was
Sup, bro? How's it
interesting
going?
experience. Yeah, he talked to me straight in Japanese, so I didn't want to go and intrude on his parade. So
Yeah.
it's kind of moved forward from there. But it was an interesting experience.
What a
But
weird level of hurdle just to get to a corner shop position. Yeah.
Yeah,
You
I
can
was
speak
honestly
Japanese.
a little bit confused. Yeah.
One time I was at a convenience, and then the Tenyin-san was like a foreigner, and then he was like wearing AirPods the whole time while like helping me.
Oh,
And I was just
okay.
like really used to like the Japanese style that it seemed super rude that he was doing that. But
Yeah, that's. I mean, I wouldn't be wearing like earphones at my job. If I was doing that, I would have done that. But then,
yeah.
I wouldn't be able to serve customers at all.
But
I
do you
guess
have
thinking-
a sort of timeline in your head of when you would want to be in Japan? Whether that's like for, if it's not holiday, if that's for like permanent residence?
The most concrete, most sadly boring result in terms of like following my content is gonna be like, if it's not before I'm 30, then I fucked up. Is the honest thought. Sorry that I swear there. If you want to like force you to beep that, if you don't like that. But like, if I don't get it by that point, it's bad. But like, people who care about things I post for some reason, I'm very thankful that they are. Like, I'm very surprised and very thankful. It's like, because it's already been 3 years, and then it's like 4 years until I turn 30. So in my head, it's as long as I get there before I'm 30, I haven't screwed up. But in their head, it's, what the hell are you doing, man? Why is it taking so many years? Isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's the solidest answer I can give. If I get there like in like 2 years, you'll know I'm doing a real good job.
I see. And I guess just while we're on the topic of Japan, do you have any like expectations for it or anything you kind of think about it before actually kind of being there?
Yeah, I imagine people are thinking that quite heavily. Like there's going to be some non-believer like listening to this and feel like, this guy probably knows nothing about Japan. He probably thinks he knows about Japan, but he knows nothing. I can tell you that I quite confidently know enough about Japan to know that I have a good idea of what I'm not going to like about Japan. You know how people often say things like, oh, it's a great place to visit, but a terrible place to live, sort of thing?
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh.
I have a bit more of an evolved form of that. Of like, it's a great place to visit, it's a good place to live, but I'm really glad I wasn't born there. That sort of feeling. Because I know enough about Japan to know that I would have died on the way to adulthood if I had lived there. Right? So it's not that, like, I have high hopes or I've low hopes. It's like, I know enough to have my own understanding of Japan, even if I haven't had the day-to-day experience of it, which is quite a big flaw to have, to be honest, because then you don't get the proper one-to-one like culture thing. But I'm able to consume Japanese people's experience of Japan. I spend a lot of time staring at Japanese Twitter. I get that, like, I understand the sort of issues. I understand how people basically feel the same way, no matter where they are in the world. I understand the subtle things that go into it, even if I can't personally, like, maybe agree with them or get them right myself, sort of thing. Mm-hmm. But like, people need to understand, me going to Japan isn't so much like, oh, Japan's perfect, I'm great there, everything's fine. It's, I would be happy if I was living by myself in a nice enough house within walking distance from a shop where I can buy Gunpla. That is my hurdle. Everyone else's hurdle might be really big. My hurdle is, I'm in the country, I'm alive, I don't want to kill myself, and I can buy toys quite easily. That's my hurdle. So comparatively, it's not that much of a problem, is it?
Mm-hmm. So you don't think there's a chance where you'd go there and then you end up hating Japan and just coming back?
I think that sort of example is more like the people that go on Jet and like get upset that they didn't get put in Tokyo, sort of thing. Like when they end up in just some random inaka somewhere, like some random countryside place, and just be like, this isn't what I was expecting at all. I have to walk like 30 minutes just to go buy food and stuff. Like, I don't really feel that I would get into that situation without me consciously being aware of it. So it's like I can't really sympathize with getting into that sort of situation. Like, I think the biggest problem would honestly be that I feel lonely, probably just as a foreigner, but also it being Japan, because I get the impression that Japan is not a place where you just easily make friends. You need very specifically the right conditions to make friends, or otherwise you are inadvertently intruding on someone else's life, is the impression that I get. So I think that would be the biggest problem.
I think on Matt's channel he interviewed this one AJATTer named Ben, and I think in the interview Ben was studying for like 2 or 3 years, but it turns out after the interview, I think it might be like a year after that, Ben ended up going to Japan and hating Japan, and then just coming back and quitting Japanese completely after like 24/7 dedication to Japanese.
That's always a possibility, but everything in life is content, so you can enjoy that when that happens, if that happens. I certainly do know of 1 or 2 vloggers that do make their entire bit being, I hate this country, and all I ever think while watching it is, that makes sense, I get that, you can have that experience, but also, why the hell are you there then? Right? That is basically the only option. It's either you like it or you get out, unfortunately. Yeah. But like
even like abroad in Japan, he sometimes has like a cynical view of Japan.
Well, you have to know the problems that happen, right? Like, I hate watching every time there's an emergency weather situation, and all of Twitter will light up with the event article that's like weather forecast bureau warns that everyone should stay home, or otherwise you might not be able to get home that day. You should only go out if it's absolutely needed. And then Twitter is nothing but people going, so my job said that's needed. My job said I need to be there that day. My school said I need to be there that day. Even if it will be so snowy that I will physically not be able to get home, they need me to be there that day. And then I watched the madness as they all rushed in as normal, because they had to. And inevitably, when stuff did get serious, the stuff did hit the fan, they sent them all home at lunchtime. But they couldn't all get home because everyone was going home at lunchtime. So they were just waiting for the storm as they were waiting for a train when there were too many people going home, just putting their workers' lives in danger because they're so afraid of the very idea of missing a day of work. Yeah, it's very easy to become critical of the things you don't like.
Yeah. I think for abroad in Japan, he he's cornered himself into his career is about Japan, so he can't leave, even if he wanted to.
Oh no, I've done the same thing. I've got Japanese in my name. No. Yeah.
And I guess speaking of that, I guess now looking at the present Japanese GaryBen. So I guess what's kind of like the day in the life of, I guess, what are you doing outside of studying Japanese?
Outside of studying Japanese? I don't know. It's the stuff I do outside of studying Japanese. It feels like if I've lowered my amount of studying Japanese, it's just because I can procrastinate in Japanese now. I feel like I'm not productive unless I'm reading a novel or watching a TV series, but I spend most of my time playing video games and watching random YouTube videos now. So it feels like I'm not doing much. But stuff outside of it, I don't know. I try to have my morning exercises every day. It's about the other things I do. I don't do much else apart from this. But if you were to ask my everyday thing, it's more like get up at X time, do morning exercises, do Anki if I feel like it's relevant, try to consume some content in the day, try to remember to have a bath, it's not really much else I'm doing. I'll sometimes add sentences. I still haven't actually really gotten past 8k sentences in my Anki deck, because it just becomes harder and harder to find words that seem worth it. Even if there's a good sentence for a word, if I haven't seen it multiple times, it just still doesn't feel like it's worth me getting. So just, unless I'm going hard and watching something that's deliberately an awkwardly heavy use of vocabulary, which likely only going to be written media, I don't really do much else.
Mm-hmm. Do you know roughly how many hours you're actively or passively immersing?
No, I think the amount of time I'm actively listening, at least, is much lower, because I have the ability to just have something on the background now and basically take it in while I'm doing something else. So technically my active listening has gone way down, because I'm just paying half attention to it while I do other things, because I can now. So it's not really like I wouldn't call it full time like my original 18 months, even though it's technically all I'm doing, but it's definitely not the same level of I'm reading like 5 volumes of manga in a day like I was when I was doing the original 18 months. It's more like, what shall I do now? I'll do the next thing. I'll do something else. I guess I'll play some video game. Like versely, quite recently, I've been playing video games that feel like I'm not really even getting much fun out of them, and yet I can't stop myself from playing them. Like, I'm playing Final Fantasy XIV, and Final Fantasy XIV to me is like my equivalent of playing League of Legends. You play it for a long time because it just gives you more stuff to do. But if someone comes along and goes, is that game fun? You're just like, I'm not sure. It's like a virtual shopping list to me. I'm not really sure if I'm enjoying it, but there is a lot to do in it.
Would you say the same thing about Japanese?
Like, whether or not it's fun?
Yeah.
Oh, hard question. There's definitely a lot of it that's like transferable to any other language. Like, the feeling of progress is basically the same. And I can say that like I do just love Japanese. It feels awkward because like the people that really spend all their time go like, oh, X-Japanese, the X language is beautiful. Like, usually people that feel like they're making sort of shallow, surface level compliments and aren't really spending that much time with the language. Whereas I'm just like, I'm not really sure there's much to say about it anymore. It's like, oh, I definitely like Japanese. I like listening to Japanese. It's not always amazing, but like, it really depends on the questions like, is Japanese good? Is the learning process good, etc. Japanese is the same. It's still Japanese. I still like it. It's not so much that it inspires me to keep going, so much it's more just like, it's what I do now. So progress becomes sort of inevitable, even if it's a bit slower. And the actual studying itself is like, when I get to those rare moments now where I have the same feeling before as I pick up a word in a few different contexts and I manage to figure it out just from that without even making a card, like sometimes I had before. That is pretty rare now, because seeing a word that I don't know in multiple contexts is pretty hard, because it has to be a pretty rare word for me to not learned it by now. Although there are a few words that just have fallen out of reach a bit. So, like, it's nice when I get occasionally a bit of that buzz of that same early feeling I had of being able to learn something. So I guess in some ways it's less interesting the more you know, because there's so much... It's not so much room to pat yourself on the back.
I see. And I guess now kind of looking forward in terms of your YouTube and Twitter, what I guess is your goal for those moving forward?
I'd say I can't really give anyone the happy news like, oh, I'm going to make another YouTube video, because I'm not sure I'd make it about. Like, I tried to make a video about just something I was reacting to. Just I saw on Japanese Twitter. That was about how Japanese people learn English, sort of thing. And that's one thing I tried to edit, and I just wasn't satisfied with staring at me as I edit. So I, if I was going to do something, it'd be like that. But I can't really convince myself to do it unless it just comes at the time. And it's like, there are a few people that, if you can believe it, do, not just on my past diaries, but do message me on Twitter saying any plans for a new video, man? It's quite a regular thing that people ask me. I'm like, I feel so bad that my answer can only be, I don't think so. I can't really think of, I think if I was making videos again, it would be more regular and it would be to a higher level of quality, but I think I'd have to handle other things in my life before I got to that, which is why inversely Twitter is a far better thing to do, because I feel I can keep it up, and I have had proof that just doing stuff on Twitter has been worth it for other people. There is some level in which I feel like I'm just doing nothing and talking to myself, but there are a few times when people honestly say they find it inspiring. And sort of introduction you gave me in this very podcast makes me go, wow, I'm glad people think that way. Thank you. Sort of feeling. So I feel like it's been worth it. So I'm probably just going to focus on Twitter, maybe figure out a different way of getting out a bit more long form thoughts that don't just involve making a kind of rough looking video sort of thing. But videos themselves, it really depends if someone said, it'd be easier if someone said, what do you think about this? And you want me to talk about it for half an hour if I can. But as for updates for diary, as I said, there's not really much to say because it's hard to get across to other people. It would probably be nice for people to have more look and more transparency when they get my honest ideas of, I feel good about this today, sort of thing. But that's the most the video could be. It couldn't be that educational for the person watching, because basically what I'm doing hasn't really changed. and there's not enough progress in terms of what can be like visible and explainable to explain to people other than that I feel good about where I am now sort of thing, or like I feel good that I managed to hear more pitch accent recently. And if people are quite reasonably using me as like a meter for understanding just how long it takes sort of thing, I feel like unfortunately I just can't really be that anymore, because I cannot do it necessarily full time anymore. So I cannot be any sort of legend of man does thing for full time, gets to perfection, then leaves. Because I feel like the more time passes, the more I stray from the amount of intense focus that the original videos were in how much time I was giving. So I can't just be like a perfect example of that. But I'm going to continue. I'm not going to stop. I'm going to get far better. And there's probably, like, hopefully in the near future, going to be tales of some guy walking around Japan that everyone assumes is like some guy born in Japan because he keeps speaking awkwardly perfect Japanese or something. Right? That's what I sort of imagine in the future. If I appear in videos where I don't fully commit to making more regular videos again at a higher budget sort of thing, in better circumstances, it's going to be that I end up showing up in other people's videos somehow randomly, sort of thing. But Twitter I can probably do for a really long time, because it's worth it in multiple ways. Like building a brand is worth it because the more that I'm consistently talking, the more what I have to say is more justified and worth people listening, because it gives more of the impression of like a real person that has the experience to say this. That's the real problem with making a sort of vlog out of nowhere. It's just like, believe me, believe everything I have to say, believe that I am as good as I say. I'm nobody, but whatever. Whereas if you say something for long enough, even if I was just a massive fraud, the very fact that I could say such important things or like helpful things for such a long time would definitely elude that sort of initial problem that always occurs, where it's just like people don't believe you.
I see. Yeah, well, we have the legend in the making right here on the podcast today. But I guess now, do you have any advice for anyone anyone else who is studying Japanese, or maybe beginning, or maybe right in the depth of it?
There's always a lot of things to say, as you can tell from the things I say. It's not so much Japanese. It's just like there's great degrees of it with Japanese, but it's just basically the same thing I would say to any languages. Don't build a myth of the language for yourself. Don't make the language a distant dream and mystic, incomprehensible thing worthy of some weirdly unquantified respect. That's just like, well, it's so beautiful, but I'm having so much problem touching it, sort of thing that people make. Like, put yourself in front of it every day and realize it's just a thing. There's not even a puzzle to solve. It's just a matter of fact boring thing. And it's not boring as in it's not fun. It's boring as in it's incredibly inevitable, mundane, and just another fact of life. Like, when you hear stories of people being successful, not in just language learning, but in anything, in like, oh, I've become really rich, sort of thing. I talked a lot about money in this, haven't I? Talk about being really rich and like go, oh, I want to be that, or I want to be an Olympic figure skater. What does it take to get there? And the answer is always going to be it's like 10 years of awkward sacrifice, and then everyone's just like, actually, I don't want to do that anymore. Right? It's the very best criticism I receive is more like, well, of course you're going to get the result you want if you put that much effort into it. And it's like, well, yeah. Isn't that the most perfect method? Like, if your method is so inevitable that it stops being interesting, it's inversely a better method. Mm-hmm. It's just a task to put in front of you. It is so utterly inevitable, and the more you make it so boringly inevitable, the more you're going to get to it. And that's not to say that it's boring as in the thing itself isn't fun. It's that there's no pop one day of, oh, I'm amazing. Because it's always your normal. Yesterday is the same as today. Tomorrow is the same as today. The day before yesterday is slightly different. The day after tomorrow is slightly different. And you won't notice it except from a comparison. There is no skill. To some extent, there isn't even a method. Only time spent consuming the language. I think this interview will have revealed to people that I'm actually very boring. I'm good at this, but I seem really bad at other things in other parts of my life. And like, even if you think I'm impressive, it's not necessarily like you're like, oh, I want to have a beer with that guy, sort of thing, right? It's like, it's very unimpressive and boring. It's the unimpressive kind of boring rather than not fun kind of boring. Again with me, and yeah, I did this. Anyone else can do it. If people call me a genius, I'll be flattered. But if people use that as an excuse to say that they can't do the same thing, that's just unfortunate, right? The people who talk most about talent are the kind of people that want an excuse to give up. The only reason they could succeed is because, well, I'm terrible at multitasking. And the task, like, the actual process is so simple. Consume things, minor sentence, put in Anki, consume things, repeat. That's basically it, with a lot of, like, get as much contact as you can, be listening to it as much time as you can. The more normal you make it, the more natural any progress will become. As I said, programming is way harder because I have to be constantly thinking and solving a problem and give myself a new project and a new goal to face. Whereas people might think that that's needed for a language, like in the form of a test or something. But you don't need that. You don't need any tests or textbooks. You just need the inevitability of the fact that you're in front of it right now, and for that to last a really long time. If by perchance you were in the perfect situation and just didn't look up anything and just had the language in front of you from multiple sources, if you had infinite time, you would become fluent. There's no doubt about it, unless you absolutely hated the experience. So the best thing you can do is become a couch potato and focus on how can I get my time contact with the language to be as close to infinite as possible. Reading comics, playing games every day may sound lazy as hell. There'll be people that come to you, that may say that, but weirdly enough, when you're reading a foreign comic, playing a foreign game, inversely they worry about you as if you're doing some Herculean task, or as if you're a child that's about to put the hand on a hot stove. So ultimately, couch potatoes win. Like, not any textbook snobs that are just like, you have to do it this way. People who learn from like watching anime are going to say Kisama in every sentence, sort of thing. Like, it's all irrelevant. They don't understand that sort of thing. Just very simply, put the thing in front of you, and you'll learn that it isn't special, but it not being special is not a reason to not enjoy yourself. And if you're doing Japanese, do Heisig. That's it, right? You don't need the readings or the vocabulary. You don't need to necessarily have to do it like how the book exactly says. You just need the writing and the word association. Get that out the way at the beginning, and it'll pay off for the entire journey. That's the only extra advice for Japanese, really, unless you really want to care about pitch accent, which I guess you might the more you put time in. But if you don't.
Wise words coming from the legend himself. So I think this is a good point to go and wrap up the podcast. JapaneseGaryBen, thank you so much for coming on. It was a pleasure having you. Everyone, make sure to go check out GaryBen's Twitter. We'll have that link below. We'll also link his YouTube if you want to go check out his previous update videos. So GaryBen, we usually have a thing on the podcast where we go and ask our guests if they have a message for the Korekara community. So what is your message?
Oh, my message is, watch your textbook today, guys. I hope it's manga.
But yeah, once again, thank you so much for coming on. It was great having you on here and learning more about you.
Absolutely welcome. I'm honoured that people want me to be on things.
Hey guys, thanks for listening to our podcast. I just want to thank our patrons, Jack, Miku, Salt Shaker, Izenga71, Drew, and Denny. If you made it this far, please leave a comment below of who would you like to see next on the podcast. We actually decided to reach out to JapaneseGaryBen after someone left a comment on our previous podcast saying that they would like to see him. So we actually do read all the comments, and please let us know if you have someone you'd like to see on here. In the meantime, go check out JapaneseGaryBen for some immersion-related rants and motivation on Twitter. Peace.